3-minute, 5-minute recap of this week's reading.
So as population shifts, grassroots organizations in San Diego and Texas have evaluated, studied, and engaged low turnout populations in order to increase voter participation, particularly during the elections that typically garner less attention. Level 5 leaders, and that's a concept that the author introduced to us before. You know, these really good folks who are good at organizing and leading activities. Those folks have coordinated with organizers and organizations to target and engage voters across various racial demographics. The organizers also leverage the knowledge base of local leaders when developing long-term plans and when assessing which reforms would have the most impact for their constituents. The author basically, in the last 2 chapters in the epilogue, talks through the activities of some of these folks, particularly in California and Texas. He also raises the concept of a new social contract, something that we all could buy into. And he says that in order to establish a new social contract, we must discontinue the practice of compromising with Confederates, whose primary goal is to maintain white political dominance throughout the country. We must re-ask critical questions and reconsider key principles that define who this democracy is for and who gets to have a voice in this democracy. Those are the elements that he's raised in the final chapters, and essentially presents us with a challenge in terms of how he shows us how things can change and how they have changed in places like California and particularly in the urban areas of Texas, where people are taking control over situations a little bit more. But he also challenges us to think about when we do win the Civil War, based on changes in demographics, what do we want that new world to look like? And that's where he begins to talk about that social contract. And to the extent that we look at that and we basically say, in this new environment, people are going to share more with one another, he feels that that is something that can potentially help get people on board with the change. So I think those are the key concepts, and I thank Robin for laying that out. He goes through the Liberation Battle Plan a couple of times, and he talks about a couple of a few of the leaders in each of the chapters, but that is it in a nutshell.
Great, thank you. Robin, did you want to add anything, or are we good?
We're good.
All right, appreciate it. And so we're going to get started with tonight's discussion. And I put the link to the reader's guide in the chat. So if you want to pull that up, you are more than welcome to. And Robin, why don't you get us started with tonight's question, and I'll post it into the chat.
Alrighty. Reflecting on each state individually, what were some key aspects of their organizing efforts, data collection, collaboration, leadership styles, and other things that stuck out to you? And this is a 4-part question. These are the corollary questions. What were some elements that were unique to their respective states? What elements or traits did some of the leaders and organizations have in common? What are some elements that can potentially be replicated to other states or regions? Alan, I see you have your hand up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi. First of all, it's been a pleasure these last few weeks. This has been a wonderful conversation between all of you, and I appreciate being part of it. One of the thing that really struck me most in these examples in San Diego and in Texas, Georgia, is the collaboration between progressive groups. You see groups going off in different directions, doing their own thing, but finding a strong leader who can pull them together and negotiate with them and come up with a common theme in that collaboration is a tremendous idea. It's an earth-shaking idea, actually, and that I wish I'd see more in Florida.
Yeah, and I just want to echo that sentiment. I think one of the things that they did a few weeks back, I think meeting 3, one of the participants said that it can be extremely daunting with the amount of needs that feel that they need to be fulfilled on the progressive side, because as progressives, we are so very diverse. But kind of like you were saying, Alan, I think the thing that is very interesting is how they had each group still focused individually on their specific target needs. You had leaders that connected a through line. And when certain groups needed to do their thing, they did their thing. And you stated it perfectly, a common theme in the collaboration. When they needed to come together under that, then they were able to do that. So that way they could kind of fulfill individual needs, but also come together for a common goal as well. Yep, and Kara, you have your hand up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
I just want to, yes, the leader thing. I've studied the civil rights movement a lot, and what Martin Luther King Jr. did better than anything, better than anyone else was, I mean, yes, he was great at speeches and all that stuff, but what he really did was take 50 different organizations with egos, big egos as their leader, and somehow bring all of them together to work for one cause. And yeah, like being able to lead people and to also lead leaders, because leaders have egos. So, I mean, it's a huge thing to be able to do that. So yeah, like having the right leaders, so important. That's it. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Kara. Annette, I see you have your hand up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, good evening. I got a little bit late into the book, and so this week I really tried to read some of those chapters that we were going to discuss. It's impressive what some of these people have built. I mean, I was so impressed with what had been done in Houston in terms of really getting people together. What was difficult for me is right now I belong to a Get Out the Vote organization. Even though I say I'm from New Cumberland, we're right there in the middle of Pennsylvania. I'm in the district of Scott Perry, if that tells you anything. And so we've been doing this since 2017. And I cannot imagine how you go from a budget of $25,000 or $50,000, like some of these organizations were, and get up to millions. And I'm just talk about being daunted. I mean, that just is so daunting to me. And you would have thought that in California, in Pennsylvania, where we had Scott Perry, that we would have been able to unseat him after everything that he did. And we did win 2 of the Democratic rival. We were able to get 2 of the 3 counties, but that 3rd county just we just can't seem to get the guy out. But I am just really daunted by these huge organizations that they formed when we are struggling to get barely 30 people out to do canvassing in Harrisburg City. So I love our leader. We do some of the things that they're recommending. In terms of we're really gathering data, we're really working on that. We're being very consistent about month after month to go out and get the vote. I'm just blown away by the huge organization. And speaking of collaboration, we are trying to collaborate with others, and it's really slow and a struggle. Anyway, so that's my contribution for this evening.
Thank you, Annette. Jamel, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, and Annette just actually touched on this, so I almost took my hand down. But you know that what I saw in the activities of those groups was just their focus on data and details and putting the facts together. And you say you guys are working on that, so I hope that comes through. But you know, I guess when I have seen people try to organize in the past, you know, part of it is they have the passion and they have the ideas. But what he talks about these level 5 leaders is that in addition to that, they have a certain amount of humility to face the facts, do the homework, and do the hard work that's needed to kind of pull things together. So, but you had mentioned data, Annette. So it looks like you guys are on track. I guess you just stay the course. Don't let it seem too daunting to you. Not everybody has to raise millions of dollars, but it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
And I think that's what stuck out to me is that it took Stacey Abrams how long to build. And so I think that's one thing for me is that it truly does take time. And I think that's the hardest part for me personally is, yep, you know what? We got this many new voters. We didn't win a single damn election, but we're going to keep pressing forward and to convince others to join. And I think that's what's amazing about these leaders and organizations, despite not winning. And I think it goes back to what Annette and Jamel, you were saying, is because they had data, they had a plan, they had a roadmap, that then they were still able to get people to stay on, get more people energized. And so, yeah, just the longevity and the true work over almost decades that people put in to make this possible. So that's what stood out to me.
Yeah. One thing that stood out to me across a lot of the organizations and states were that the leaders who were brought into the movement because of some type of injustice that they faced as young people, once they got into a position to run their own organizations, they reached out to other young people to train them in political organizing and essentially how to run campaigns, political thought, and they made sure that these were things like internships. They're paying these young people to learn these roles, to get involved in their organizations early. Stacey Abrams' organization in Georgia did that. Tram Wynn's organization in Virginia had the leadership training program. I forget her name, but the leader in Texas reached out to young organizers and brought them into her organization young and kind of molded them into leaders who she was then able to pass the torch to, you know, towards the end of that 10-year plan. Once her 10-year plan started to take fruition, she had someone who she could pass the baton to. So that really stood out to me. All right, we ready for the next question?
Yeah, and I think it would be it'd really be a disservice to Steve's book if we didn't point out to the fact that it was led by Black and brown Americans. And just gonna be honest, I'm a white person. There's a lot of white people on this call. And so are we listening and creating space for our Black and brown brothers and sisters to truly take the leadership and listen to them because they have ideas? Are we giving them space in the space that we personally consume as well?
Yeah.
Yes, Jamel, do you want to do number 2? And I'll put the question in the chat. And Jamel, your mic's off, so we can't hear you.
Sorry. We put in a link to a news article. And according to that news article, roughly 100,000 fewer people in Harris County, Texas, voted for governor in 2022 than in 2018. And that's a roughly 10% drop, despite 200,000 more people being increased in the voter rolls. So what we saw there was that there was clearly a get out the vote campaign. And yet in 2022, there was potentially less enthusiasm. So the question is, if you live in a blue or purple dot in a red state, what are some of the strategies to increase voter turnout of a progressive base? So I'd throw that question out to folks, and then I'll share after we talk about it a little bit. I contacted my cousin in Harris County, Texas, to see what he thought about those stats, and I'll share some of his thoughts. So we do have some people who I think have described themselves as being in a blue or purple dot in a red state, and they've expressed some frustration about not being able to change things. But one of the things that has been pointed out in the book is that you actually can begin to change things within those dots and begin to take some control and to have some influence. So anybody who lives in one of those situations want to share? Go ahead, Peg. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thanks, Jamal. So I'm from the suburb of Philadelphia, long-standing blue area. We are very deep blue, although my residential area where I am is primarily red. But what I found has helped to get people out to vote is, I mean, motivation just kind of comes from within. You can't really do a lot to, instill motivation. But what we can do, and Philadelphia did this, or has been doing this, especially since Obama first ran for president, was making sure that it's not just, who you vote for, but the act of getting the vote out, meaning getting people out to vote, because that's our loudest voice. And so that might be something as mundane, as seemingly somewhat trivial as getting people to the polls in the first place. That doesn't mean like motivating them to go. It means making transportation available. I remember at the time when Obama was first running, my office, although I wasn't working for a health clinic, came by and used it, or the health clinic was a stop, a physical location where a van came and picked people up all day long on election day and just kind of did a circuit and drove them to the polls, picked up the people who were finished, brought them back and drove others in. I mean, and that was really That was really, really a beautiful experience. And then now you hear things like, oh, well, you can't even be offered a cup of water standing in line if you're at the polls. Or maybe encouraging more people, if they don't want to physically go to the polls, to sign up to get their election ballot, or do our part to help support them in the act of voting, regardless of what they're voting for. Of course, we know what we want them to vote for, but I think the solution comes in more in being able to encourage and support people just to get out to the polls.
Thanks for that. And I'm going to ask Rob and Patty to unmute. There you go.
One of the things that I remember from the book was that Lynn Hidalgo was the county judge, which was like judges in Ohio, but it's more like the county executive. And she specifically did a lot of things to make voting much easier for the voters. And what she did was have 24-hour voting and drive-through voting. And I can't remember all of the things that she did, but I do know that as soon as the election in 2020 was over, the state took all of those away. And I think whenever we try to remove barriers, we see voters come out and vote. When we erect barriers, then voting numbers drop. It's a lot more difficult for people who are working 1 or 2 jobs, have a family, to get out and vote in those hours that are available. So I think that that's one of the things that I think was an important indicator, and that they stressed again and again was, people of privilege don't have barriers, but it's people at the lower end of the economic ladder who do, and people of color do. And it's not by accident that they have to stand in line for hours. It's not that way in certain other areas. You go in and go out, it's very quick. So I don't know. I mean, I think that some of those things that were instituted in the 2020 election, we did those nationwide, we would see a lot more voters come to vote. But unfortunately, right now, we're in the position of, well, at least in Ohio, throwing up barriers, making it more and more difficult each election for people to actually vote. And I'm not sure what to do about that. I mean, getting out the vote is great, and I work at that every year, but sometimes it's very difficult. I like the idea of a van picking people up and driving them. I think that that's a really good idea, and I'm sure there are many more that I'm just not aware of. But I think that we need to be aware of what's happening with voter suppression and try to combat that, as well as just getting the vote out. That's all I have to say.
You're good. You're good.
Thanks.
How do I get that off?
Thanks, Patty.
Turn it off.
Thanks very much. Jane, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Yep, you're still muted. Hold on, try again. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep, now go ahead.
Okay, all right. And hearkening back to Alan's comment, thank you all. This has been an incredible journey through this book with you also. Thank you very much for that. As I live in the county just north of Harris County, and in fact lived in Harris County for 10 years before moving to Montgomery County, which is just north. So I moved from Harris County to Montgomery County, which is neon blood red. And so there are several of us here that are fighting the good fight, but everything, and I don't have an answer to this question. In fact, that's why I'm here, is to get answers to this exact question right here. We are known for the state that doesn't vote. Our county is known for the county that doesn't vote. So one of the things that I've listened to throughout the book in my heart, I guess, is and the literally getting people to the polls is a problem, because they're making it harder and harder, and those laws aren't stopping anytime soon. But then I started thinking about, what about the people that have vehicles that can get them there, but they don't have a job that allows them the time off to do this? So I just yesterday got accepted into a group of liberal business owners. So I don't own a business. So for whatever reason, they accepted me into their group. So hopefully some conversations can begin with those people to figure out how we could maybe garner some support corporately to let to make it easier for people to take off. And if they don't have a car, at least they'll have the hours off to get in a van to go to the polls. That's all I got.
Thanks, Jane. Wes, go ahead, and then I'm going to share my cousin's story.
Yeah, I think for definitely I'm in a blue dot in a red state, and I think something I saw in Kansas is when we start putting issues on the ballot, abortion. Kansas is a pretty red state too. And Nebraska, we're gearing up to have a couple referendums in regards to abortion rights, keeping public funds in public education. And so I'm really excited to, we just had Raise the Wage in 2022. And so I think that is a huge opportunity progressives have in red areas, is to put issues on the ballot. And I think when we do that, and then also I think when we get younger candidates, diverse candidates, and I'm speaking more from a local level, not necessarily presidential, but I think that as we see more candidates who look like our young, diverse progressives, that we'll see more of them coming out. But that also, it's hard because that means they got to win and get support in the primaries, and often that doesn't happen. So yeah, but those are my 3 quick thoughts, and I'm excited to hear what your family had to say.
Well, I'll share that quickly, and then we'll go on to Kara and Jane. So my cousin said, I said, what's going on? He said, well, maybe multiple reasons. He said, one, in Harris County, they make it increasingly hard to vote around here, and they are still at it. A Republican legislator recently in Austin, which is a different county, recently proposed removing all voting stations from all university and college campuses in the state. And he's on a campus, and he said his campus had fought for 50 years to get those stations on campus. And they even had a Supreme Court case back in the 70s. But now, there's just this push against it. And really, there can be no reason other than trying to control that and suppress that a bit. The legislators' argument was that they were going to make the campuses safer by not opening them up to people coming in from the public. But my cousin basically says that's a joke. They're public institutions, and they have public events all the time, and the library is open to the public. So why not have it be open for voting? He also said that in 2018, it was the first vote where people had the chance to vote against what he calls the Trump disaster. So they were energized to vote against something. And in 2022, he didn't feel like they were energized to vote for something. And so that gets to Wes's point about trying to get things on the ballot that people feel energized about to vote for. He mentions the abortion decision. He said that galvanized people elsewhere, but it didn't seem to galvanize people in Texas. And then he thought maybe people coming out of COVID had different priorities. So those were the things that he shared with me. He ended it with, you can use your gun license to vote here, but not your student ID. He said, this place is crazy. So now I'm gonna let Kara, I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
Yes, all of those things. And I'm from Indiana, and when Georgia went past all of these voter suppression laws about the not giving people food and stuff in line, besides that one, when they were listing all of these things that they were doing in Georgia, Indiana already does all of that. Like, we are one of the biggest, the most gerrymandered and the most voter repressive state. Also, when the Republicans had a supermajority, and this was back after we went blue for Obama the first time as a state, and after that we got a supermajority, and they passed a law that you can't put any amendments on the ballot. So we will never get an abortion ballot, an abortion thing on our ballot. Nothing. There's no reason to go vote in this state for liberals. I live in the second largest city, and we have a Democrat mayor, and we just this year, well, just this last election, got a Democrat state representative, but everybody else is just, we only have 10 Democrat senators in our house, or in our Senate. Like, and we have big cities. We do. It's just very gerrymandered, and people, I think, have given up.
So Kara, before we get to Jane, I mean, one of the things that I think is sometimes you just have to get people to go on record. I mean, you know, like if you are in a place where you feel like people are not supporting taking steps to make sure that it makes it easier for everybody to vote, you know, writing a letter to some of those state senators saying, I want to know whether or not you believe that every person should vote. I want to know what you are doing to make it easier for people to vote. And you know, they've got to answer, or if they don't answer, just keep sending that letter and just say they're not answering this question. Put them in a position to take some steps to put them in a position where they actually have to defend what they're doing. So shine some light on it is, yeah, something that I think could be happening. Jane, I'm asking you to unmute.
Yeah, once again, my head is swimming because just what you just said just now, I've made many letters. I'm not the only ones. When I say I mean we like-minded here, many letters, many phone calls descended upon the Capitol steps, then in the legislature's offices. So I feel like that, you know, we're doing everything we can from that standpoint. I really do. But I just wanted to make one more point, and this may be on me and a reflection of me. I am a part of currently, well, since the liberal businesses, 7 organizations here. Reading this about Texas and TOP, never heard of them. So I looked them up, and I will be getting in touch with them. But that's a little bit concerning for me, because I wonder if, you know, we do have access to somebody that could pull us all together. In all my conversations that I've had with among the different groups, nobody wants to be affiliated with the Montgomery County Democrats because they want to be bipartisan. They don't want to look like they're affiliated with a certain party, which I can understand to a certain extent. but I kept asking, isn't there an umbrella organization that we could all fit under? And it wasn't until I read in Mr. Phillips' book about TOP. So I'm not sure what that means, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Thanks, Jane. And just to keep it up, when you send those letters and you know, what's the answer? Do you get an
None.
answer? Pardon?
No. And so we resorted to the face-to-face, and they were, in particular this day, they were having hearings on gun safety. And so we descended upon the Capitol in droves. And I was told by my direct representative that I should be carrying a gun, is what he meant. So that was the response. They have no intentions of, I get no response. If I do get a response, it's a form letter.
Right.
And then they just restate what it is that they're going to do.
Mhm. Okay.
So
Well,
any ideas, bring them on.
I get part of it is that I think of, and this, I think that the author points this out as well. Do we want people to vote or not? Which is, that's not about gun control. That's not about abortion. That's not about all of the many issues in which people can disagree over. But the fundamental concept of voting, and we get to this notion of, how could anybody stand up and say, actually, I don't want so many people to vote. You force them to acknowledge that is, just keep badgering, I guess.
Well, then maybe if you could, for us participants here, do a special write-up on how exactly to word that, because what we get back is, but voter fraud. So that's our response that we get about voting. So if you have some good, I hate to say it this way, but kind of gotcha statements that we can use to address our legislators in power, then that would be wonderful.
So Robin, I'm going to turn it back over to you, but my homework for your follow-up stuff is to try to come up with something like that. I'm a lawyer. People pay me to write those types of, like, how would you put this? So I'll try to come up with something, and and then we'll put it in the notes afterwards, and then use it however you want.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All righty. Question number 3. With data being critical to developing a realistic plan, what do you know about getting voting and demographic data in your area? What more would you like to know? How can you hold your local organizers accountable for getting on top of the facts? I'll start with some pieces of it. I think for a lot of people, like the average person, they aren't even aware of everything that needs to go into participating in our governmental process to begin with. So just helping people understand the importance of data, I think, will be an important first step as well.
I can't find my hand raised thing, so I just unmuted myself. One of the things, there is actually a lot of data out there that you can poke around in. I mean, there's census data, there's voting data, and when I came up with those stats for Harris County, I actually found that stat just by looking at the voting stuff. And then I found a news article. I was like, what's going on here? And then I wondered if anybody had written a news article about it. And so I found the news article. But if you are interested in these things, it's actually not too, I mean, there's quite a bit of data out there. And these folks who Steve Phillips have identified as these level 5 leaders, they're digging into it. They're using it. And it might seem daunting, but the fact is that there's actually so much more out there when you just begin to look at it that you can use. So I guess I would encourage people to just poke around in some of those databases and like look what the census says about the demographics in your area, or look at what voter turnout was like.
Go ahead, Annette.
Okay. All of a sudden my thing did some weird things. Our data collection right now in our group, we have targeted a section in Harrisburg. It's a very low income section. And that was targeted because it had literally single digit voter turnout. I think it's up to in the ones, in the teens at this point. But what we're using our data collection mainly is to be able to contact people again as we're going door to door, if they want to be contacted with more information. We also have a high Spanish population. So if we go to a door where they don't speak in English, we have someone who calls them back for Spanish. But our data collection right now is mainly to go back to those people to get more community engagement. We did hold a series of meetings with residents about what issues were important to them. And one of the things in Allison Hill, that's the area where we go, is the lighting. So we started a campaign where we went looking for lights that were out, and we got a connection with the city, and we've fixed 48 lights, and now we have some funding to get some LED lights for the residents. But anyway, in terms of, that's mainly what our data collection is so that we can reach out to people again and not just go to their door and say, hey, are you a voter? Whatever, are you? But what can we do for you? Do you need a ride to vote? All those kinds of things. Do you have any other questions? So that's what our data is about. I don't know how much more, what other data should we be collecting, if anybody has any ideas.
If it's okay, Jamel and Wes, I would like to share my screen really quickly. So, I just want to say too, a lot of the discussion that we are having, and just the fact that we can be here, we have a certain privilege that a lot of people in the progressive base don't have, and that is time. That is time and that is money, So we have to keep those things in mind as well when we're asking ourselves these questions and answering these questions. But to go back as well to Peg's question about how do we find the data? Some of it is relatively easy. Some of it's hard. I'm gonna just share my screen. I don't remember why I had done this a couple years ago, but I figured out that you can actually find someone's voter records. I just double checked to make sure that I could do it. So literally, I just typed that in. This is where I live. Durham County voter records. Type that in. Google comes up, voter search. Put my name in, Robin McLaughlin, registered, search. Searching. That's me. Gives you tells you my race, when I registered to vote, the party I'm registered with, all of my districts, and it tells you this is public record. It gives you my voting record. It tells you every election that I voted in, and if it was a primary election as opposed to a general, which primary I voted in. So I get that a lot of times data is complicated, but to Jamel's point, some of this data is out here and it's ready for us. We just have to be ready to use it. We have to have those plans in place, like the leaders that were talked about in this book. We have to know what data we want to find, how we want to use it, and what we're going to do with it once we have it. But I just wanted to show you guys this because this is public record. I first found this just being curious and put in a Google search. So if you put in your own county, you can potentially find something similar. This is from my county in North Carolina.
I knew you could do that, but I didn't know you could just Google and find your, especially, I don't even know, in Nebraska, I'm curious, and it may differ state to state too, because
It does. I think it does. Yeah. Because a lot of it is wrapped around the laws of the state and the records that your state keeps. But I would bet that more people than not can find that kind of stuff.
Well, and I think too is, sometimes we think people in our circles vote every election just like we do. And so I think one place to start is start in your network and to look up the people that you are close to, and start with your family, and yeah, so that's really cool, Robin. I don't know if Nebraska's is that in depth on if you vote in certain elections and how, but yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And also to your point, like you said, like my family, a lot of my family is working class. So I text them, it's the beginning of voter season. But sometimes they might have to vote early because they can't get off work on voting day. And I tell them, make sure you're voting. If you need XY day, I unfortunately live away from my family, but I'm like, okay, tag off. My one cousin will watch my sister's kids so she can go vote. And then in a couple days, my sister watches my cousin's kids so my cousin can go vote. You know what I mean? Like that's the other thing I think we need to start doing as progressives is start trying to think around the barriers. To Bob and Patty's point earlier, a lot of progressive people have working class barriers to voting. We need to start thinking about that instead of just telling people. I think that's another thing too that answers why people don't vote. They get berated when they don't vote. And so there's no excitement around voting. If we actually think about why a lot of our progressive base can't vote and start to come up with, and it's not even that creative, making sure somebody has somebody to watch their kids, coming up with realistic solutions so that progressive voters can get out there and vote, as opposed to, because I saw a lot of that happening in 2016 and 2018. Middle class progressive voters, middle class liberal voters, there was a lot of berating going on lower income and working class voters for not voting. Sorry, off my sandbox. Soapbox.
Well, let's move on to question 4, because we're got about 30 minutes left. And so question number 4, this is the chance, and I really want to focus on this first part of the question, to celebrate some things that people are a part of or that are aware of, where the Liberation Battle Plan is being implemented. Maybe not fully, but there's parts of it, because I think some people have said it, where telling of stories, and, Jane mentioned, like, I just realized about the organization mentioned in Philip's book, and so let's take this next question to really focus on what are some current implementations of parts of the Liberation Battle Plan that are going on in an organization you are a part of or aware of. And Jamal has put in the chat also what are the parts of the Liberation Battle Plan. Don't be too shy to share those positives. Go ahead, Jane. And then Peg, would love for you to jump in the queue to share what that looks like.
Okay, so I'm assuming that Jamal is referring to like playing the long game and those parts. So I feel like that one of the things that just happened here in Montgomery is County is we have a youth organization that just recently got chartered as the Democratic Youth in our county. So I am working with the other adult organizations to ensure that they're aware that they're there and to figure out how we can best support them. So that's a positive, I feel like.
Good work. All right, we will get Catherine next after Peg and Rob and Patty. Go ahead. Peg, are you? I can't find you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, Russ. I don't know what happened. I couldn't unmute myself, but thank you. So in my area, the local Democratic Party will have, especially this happens a lot during the summer times, is we'll have, postcard writing, letter writing campaign nights, and we'll kind of get together and fill something out for our candidates to be able to send out in the mail. Our local Democratic Party also hosts online Zoom nights with candidates for the party who are running for various levels of election. And then they have other kind of like Zoom gatherings or something to try to help to get people engaged. And the local Democratic Party has a very, very strong presence when we have larger community events, like we have a Harvest Day or some kind of community thing like that. The Democratic Party is always very, very strong and present at those kinds of activities. And for that, I really appreciate, kind of being pervasive like that without being in your face pervasive kind of thing. I mean, it's just enough of a push to make sure people know that you're there.
Thanks, Peg. Robin, Patty. Sorry, I was trying to get Peg's mic turned on, and so sorry for the confusion.
All right. Just in my in a rural county, it's totally red. There's a Democrat on that, but is using our phone calls and door-to-doors to collect data. They give us questions to ask, and then we send responses back into the state Democratic Party. And I think they're trying to correct errors in the database that they already have, as well as add more information to the database that they have. And I'm hoping at some point they're going to share that more broadly. But right now it's just the state. I'm on the executive committee for the Democratic Party, and I'm a precinct captain. There are only like Democrats in my precinct. Several of them are. So, it takes time because we're so spread out to go door to door. It's not like it's going into a subdivision or something. It's a time-consuming thing, but we're trying to have all the precinct captains get to all the Democrats in their precinct. And the other thing we're trying to do is to bring there for just host it. Maybe 5 people will show up, maybe 7, maybe 10, but that's, and then we gather data at those hearings. And so we do have, like Robin was talking about, we get that online and going to the Board of database, or you can go there to the Board of Elections website, and they'll tell you a lot of information, but not as much as the Google search that Robin told us about. So I want to pursue that.
Very
That's
nice.
it.
And I think, Patty, too, something that stuck out to me is, one, it's good to have data, but then are you also taking measures to make sure that that data is accurate? And, following up with folks to really make sure, is this the right phone number for you? Is this the right email? What's the best way to contact you? So really that's something that stuck out to me. Data's good, but is it accurate? So thank you.
Yeah.
All right. And Catherine, I know you put in the chat that you would like to talk, so I'm gonna prompt you to turn your mic on.
Okay, am I on?
Yes, you are.
I'm Catherine, and I'm also from North Carolina. And Peg said a lot of the things that our Democratic Party is doing in our county. But one of the tools that we use is Vote Builder. And Vote Builder allows you to create phone banks and lists of new people into your precinct that you can write postcards to. And part of the phone banking is to get the data correct. Is the phone number actually getting the voter that you want? Or anybody that's called into our offices, we have a list and we call them back periodically to make sure that their data is still accurate. And then when we go to those kinds of festivals where we have a booth, again, people sign up if they're interested, and we keep track of those and then periodically update that to make sure that they're still interested and that their information is still correct. So yes, data accuracy is very painful. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Appreciate it. All right. I think it would be good time for the next question. And I believe this is going to start with a poll question. Am I right, Robin? This is our poll question.
Yes. Sorry
Awesome.
about that. I needed to,
Well, I will share it. No worries.
is
So-
that 3 or 4? Let me see.
Well, I launched it, so
Okay.
so we're going with it. So our current this poll question is, what type of messaging do you think will be the most effective in getting buy-in for the new social contract that Steve Phillips talks about in the epilogue. Liberty and democracy, let's live up to the ideals on which America was founded. Sound economics, combating systemic issues is more cost effective to taxpayers. Or empathy, we are all one America.
Yeah.
What message do you think would be most effective?
And while everyone is voting, think about, what do you want to see in the new social contract? Is there a societal need or lost opportunity that you feel particularly strong about being in that contract? So while people are voting, if anybody wants to speak up and let us know what you think should be in the new social contract.
Folks are still voting, appreciate it. We're at 71%.
Kara, if you want to go ahead, I'll ask you to unmute.
I think education, childcare, all of those things to help parents, because the society that we live in hates parents and mothers especially, and God help single mothers. We are, I mean, it's like you're being punished for having children in this country. You get no help, you get no nothing. You get degraded at work because your kids are sick and you have to take time off. Just, yeah, mandatory, time off for kids, for family leave, for maternity. I personally went back to work 2 weeks to the day that I had my first kid. Like, because I didn't have insurance, I didn't have money, I could not afford to, I couldn't miss a paycheck. Had to do it. So, yeah, we just really need to focus on families and educate our schools, pay our teachers, that kind of things.
Yeah.
And these are economic things, but are social things that most people agree with. Most people with kids and family will agree with these things. It's just the Republican propaganda that makes people not think that these things are okay, that every other country does. Well, every other developed country does.
I think the difficult thing around that is the messaging in who is responsible for it, because like you said, our governments, our current social talking points are around personal responsibility. And ultimately, yes, people do have a certain level of personal responsibility, but also in terms of society, especially things around, like you said, education, universal pre-K, family and maternity leave. Those are things that are societally beneficial, because otherwise people get exposed to exploitation from workplaces that don't allow that. They don't make enough money to be able to do those kinds of things. So even if a person is being personally responsible, our society is set up in a way that the relevance of that almost goes out the door.
Yes.
Yeah. Wes, if you had something to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to share 18 out of 21 folks were able to participate. So 85%.
I think me, you, and Demel might be the three who didn't vote.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because we can't. But here are the results. 5 folks selected liberty and democracy. 50% said sound economics. And then 4 said empathy. So those are the results.
So if you voted, let us know why you think your message will be most effective. Especially there are a lot of folks who voted for the sound economics part of it. Anyone want to share why you think your messaging is most effective? I'm sorry, Wes, I cut you off. Were you going to answer the previous question about the social contract?
Nope, sorry.
Okay, Annette, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Annette, you're still muted.
Oh, I thought I had muted. Okay, there we go. I chose it only for practical reasons. My heart was with the first one. That's where my real heart is. But I chose it only because it's just more practical. People are, that's where their worries are. That, economics. Do I have money for my rent and my food and for what my children need? That's where we live day to day. So that's really why I chose number 2.
Thank you, Annette. Ellen, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Did that work?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. I voted for economic equality too, because there's something, and you said it, Robin, it's societally beneficial. All those things will benefit the society as whole. And then, so when you look at economic equality, empathy, liberty, and democracy, they blend in one. So where do you start? I figured economic equality to start leveling that playing field so people can have empathy and support liberty and democracy as we supposedly as a country represent.
Yeah. Thank you, Ellen. Rob, every time someone says that, it sounds like they're saying my name, Robin Patty. I'm going to ask you guys to unmute.
Okay. I think that's more practicality also, because the issues
You guys are breaking up a little bit.
could. Sorry.
We're in the wilderness.
Yeah. Public policy about price controls, these mergers. I mean, we only have 3 or 4 grocery chains, stuff like that affects the ability of corporations to raise prices. And what can you do as a consumer? But those are things that the elected officials can do something about if they choose to, if they're in there. And they're all policies that the population is in favor of, because it benefits them, and they're the people, not the rich 1%, but the consumers are the ones who actually are out there spending their paychecks to keep the economy going. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for that. Anyone else have anything else want to share? Sarah, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
I really like the first one and the last one, but to me, it seems like they're very abstract. Well, and let's just admit that the pandemic showed us that, like, what, 50% of this country has no empathy whatsoever? Like, I don't know. It just seems like nobody really cares about anybody else. Well, as a broad generalization, people worried more about going out to eat than protecting people who needed to be protected.
Yeah.
And the democracy thing, that's wonderful, but it's so abstract. And I think for messaging, we really need to get behind something that is like, that you can see.
Very concrete.
feel.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking of as well when I made up those choices around economics. I remember reading something that was talking about how it's actually cheaper in terms of taxpayer dollars. It's cheaper to have public support systems to get people out of homelessness than it is to police them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm gonna ask you to unmute and then Latisse after Wes.
Yeah, I think so when I saw when Robin, proposed this question originally, I was thinking on it. And I then afterwards actually read the epilogue. So I kind of was reading with the question in mind. And what really sticks out to me is at the start of the epilogue where Phillips includes the quote from Nicole Hannah Jones. And so when I personally thought, I was like, yep, probably economics, as for the many reasons folks have mentioned, particularly with economics is something we can see and touch and whatnot. But then it really got me thinking, or at least in my personal opinion, if Phillips was to answer this question, it would be A. And simply because Black and brown people, the fact of democracy is what keeps them engaged, and that promise. And I just wonder, what would it look like? Because we have never, in my era, never ran on democracy itself and truly made democracy the issue. And if we did, what would happen? So I don't know. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but that's where my wheels are turning. And I think I saw Mary put something in the chat, that I think kind of speaks to that as well. So that's where my head's going.
Thank you, Wes. Latisse, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If not, please correct me. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry I started so late and I'm pushing buttons trying to figure out how things work. But I think when I listen to other countries and the benefits they offer in terms of having a good health care and good child care, all of that push here is messaging. I believe that Republicans are constantly pushing. They want your things, they want your stuff. And this is why you have, like you said, 50% of the people not caring, because they're being drilled. I feel like it's drilled in their head, from a right-wing media that, this is not about a one country, it's us and them. And this is what I think stems from the problems. If we could all look at each other as one America, we would be like these other countries and have the empathy. That's all I really wanted to say.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Okay.
Did you say me?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, for less noble reasons, I did choose A, because I started thinking at the beginning of Steve's book and flipping the script. And so this sounds very much like what the Republicans are saying. They want things to go back to the way, to the ideas that we were founded on. Their version of that is wrong and skewed. I'm skewed. Sorry, I meant skewed.
Good work.
But that was a Freudian slip. But so I thought maybe if we could use that language as well, but then mean it the way it was intended in the beginning, that could also be I don't know, some kind of a dog whistle somewhere.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. I have heard language around, people wanting to create imagery around us kind of reappropriating the American flag, because a lot of far right wing groups, especially ones that kind of have a penchant for violence, have been using the flag in their imagery a lot. And I've heard exactly to your point that some people were saying we basically need to reappropriate that ideology of liberty and democracy being a progressive value. Yeah. Another reason I was thinking that sound economics, personally for me, I would have chosen B, even though, like the Kara's point, my heart is in ANC. I think that there are a lot of moderates who, because of their economic ideals, end up voting with Republicans. So they end up voting on what they believe is the basis of sound economics, things that are actually anti-democratic, because they are focused on purely the economics of it. And we don't get the messaging out about how societally things like a strong education system, things like universal health care, things like mental health services to keep people out of prisons, how prisons are actually more costly to taxpayers. Homelessness is more costly to taxpayers. You know, they don't think of those things as progressive ideals, so they end up voting in ways that are discriminatory against people of color. They end up voting for people who will enact policies that are discriminatory against LGBTQIA folks, because they're so focused on economics, and they don't have the empathy because they don't see it impacting their wallets. So they don't see that it's a problem, which is unfortunate, but I think that's the reality. All righty, I'm gonna zip through. Do we have time for question 6, Wes, or do we need to table it here?
Yes. And your answers can only be 30 seconds.
All righty. So everybody, it says, Philip says in the book, a contract is an agreement between 2 or more parties where they make mutually enforceable promises. Once we win the new Civil War, how do we go about establishing a social contract that is mutually enforceable? How do we hold each other accountable as constituents? How do we hold our leaders accountable? And once we have those leaders in place, how do we allow ourselves to be accountable to them? Any thoughts?
I'll jump in. So I think, part of this, and, just in terms of some of the other parts of the book where he talks about, from his perspective, the demographics, he kind of says it's inevitable. The demographics are changing. The country is changing. We will win this Civil War. And when we do win this Civil War, what are we going to do? How are we going to treat everybody? That's kind of what I got from it. And my view is that when we do get through this, and when things kind of evolve as they have, based on demographics, that part of that social contract to me is being able to listen to everybody's grievances, whether you agree with them or not, but just being open to listening to them. And right now we don't seem to have much of that going on, but when the landscape changes, those that, if the forces of good win, the forces of good have to listen and be prepared to listen to some of the grievances of the forces of bad. That's my own personal view, just being willing to do that. You don't necessarily have to agree, but you can't ignore them. You can't sweep it on, you just can't sweep it away, because that's what we've probably done for too long, and we're now finding that it's coming back to the surface when we've swept stuff away.
I will add to that, though, that as long as the grievances are founded in ideals of a common good, we can all agree that we want universal health care and disagree on the ways to implement them. We can all agree that trans rights are human rights. So that means the difference needs to be us disagreeing on what human rights are, what applies to all humans. We can disagree on what our educational curriculum needs to look like, but we need to agree that we will teach an honest and complete history that includes every American identity, every citizen, that honors every single type of citizen that is an American. So we can hear grievances and we can share grievances, but we also have to reaffirm that we will respect each other as Americans. We should not have to allow people to be dehumanized in order to hear and understand someone else's grievance. If your grievance is grounded in dehumanizing me, I don't have to listen to that. I'm not going to listen to that. So I agree, I understand, I affirm your point. I just want to make sure that that's one of the specifications in the new contract. That's how we make it mutually enforceable, is mutual respect.
I agree with that, Robin. Yeah, part of me says that it should go without saying, but you're absolutely right. It can't go without saying, because we do have to set those ground rules.
Annette, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
First of all, Robin, you rock. Let me just say
Thank
that.
you.
I'll make this short. One of the gut punches at the very beginning of the book is that we have wanted to be white more than democratic. And I'm telling you, that is a statement that Mr. Phillips makes that it haunts me. It's been haunting me ever since I read it. So remember, as we're trying to come together and and listen to each other, blah blah blah. I'm with you, Robin. I'm kind of done with hearing that other stuff. Anyway.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jane, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Whoops, sorry. I thought I took my hand down because you basically said, but I'll reiterate it in my own words, I guess, since I'm unmuted now. To me, to keep the contract mutually enforceable is for us to have all three of those in that poll question that you had. But we need to be watching each other's backs. So we need to be there not only as allies, but as guardians, and to make sure that we can be there when the time arises and have, yeah, that's it. Just be there for each other.
I love that. Not just allies, but guardians.
Mhm.
Eddie, anyone else have any other quick things to add before we wrap up the meeting?
I'm gonna just read from page 315 in the physical book. In a community bound together by common values and mutual respect, compromise can be the grease that makes the machinery of society function. But with people who are waging war against you and everything you hold dear, compromise is suicide. And so the reality is, once this war is won, they do not get a say in what that social contract is. And my